Hello, everybody. I'm just waiting for the last bit of people to file in. It's exactly 12:30, so we're gonna get started here in a couple minutes. Before we get started, just some housekeeping items. I'm Ian Newman. I run a little bit of the marketing as well as to partake in some of the sales operations here at Horizant. Thank you for joining us for the first part of our Horizant Knowledge Series. This is the first in a 10-part series, as you may have noticed. First one today is going to be covering making communication easy for service delivery. This in a 10-part series. Sean, I believe you have the full agenda ready. Sorry, there we go. Some housekeeping items first. So the first in a 10-part series. The second one, bi-weekly, is going to be on more hands-on asset management. These all will be available in a training catalog at the end, and once the 10-part series has concluded. So keep an eye out for those as well. In regards to chat and questions, we will have a 15 to 20-minute Q&A session at the end of this. So if you have any questions, you're sitting on it or you're sitting on a question throughout it, put it in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on them. I'll compile them all to make sure that we can get to them at the end for Sean to answer. As many of you may know, this is Sean Benson. He's a resident Archibus expert and has been providing training and Archibus knowledge to Horizon for a few years now. So he'll get to answer his questions as fully as possible at the end. So if you want to give yourself a little introduction, I will give you the floor, Sean, and you can take it away.
Great, thanks, Ian. I'm just, like Ian said, I've been doing this for a few years. I started with Archibus back in 2006 or something, and we've been working on different applications ever since. And so in terms of these series, Wayne asked me if we could do a series of training, basically quick trainings for customers who are using Archibus. And part of the reason is not just for, to get a little bit of idea of how simple or how complex some things are, but also just to kind of reiterate, sometimes it's us who make things a little bit complicated. And we want to talk about how you can kind of prepare for using the Archibus system. And all of these trainings are designed to kind of work on top of each other. So we're going to start with a pretty in-depth one today about making communication easy. It's really about developing services and a service function within your organization and using Archibus. But after that, as we talk about asset management, we're going to continue talking about services, and then BIM is a specific service related to assets. We'll then hop into preventive maintenance and capital projects and compliance. So each of the 10 sessions in the series are going to build on top of each other. And ultimately, we're going to say, we're going to have a few themes that you're going to see throughout, which is you've got to keep things simple. I think one of the issues with any system is that human beings tend to overcomplicate things and overthink things. You get this system that can do all sorts of different things, and it has all sorts of information on the screen, and you try to use it or you want to use it, but what ends up happening is you make it difficult or clunky to use. So we want to get back to focus on how do we keep things simple within the system, and how do we set it up to make sure that you can, in this case, communicate with your customer and communicate with your management and get the reporting and the functionality that you need out of the system. So for today's session, I'm going to talk a little bit about an opportunity that I see all the time with all the customers I work with, and then we'll talk a little bit about common scenarios in service related to services where you need to communicate between multiple people. And then I'm going to run through very quickly the basic steps that you would take to set up Archibus to have a effective communication between customer and service provider, basically. And like Ian said, at the end, we'll have about 15 minutes for all the questions that you have. So we'll stick around for that after the fact. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn off my camera so you don't have to look at my face. And then we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about what kind of made this, gave me this idea. This is an image that I like of several customers that I've met in my life. And one of them in particular was out in California. It was a nice, I was visiting a customer, I think it was in the Automobile Association. And I walked into, it wasn't this guy, but it was someone who looks just like this guy. And I walked into this beautiful building and met him at in the cafeteria. And as we were sitting there talking, and as I was introducing myself, someone spilled a cup of coffee. And just like you see in the picture here, the facility manager picks up his walkie-talkie, says something into it, and about 10 seconds later, I think it was almost immediate, someone appeared from outside of a closet with a bucket and a mop, wiped up the coffee, and then disappeared just as quickly back away again. And I said, that is amazing. Wow, is that what your operation looks like here? because that was phenomenal. You know, a problem happened, you picked up the phone, you communicated about that problem, you got it resolved right away, and it was done. And he said, yeah, we're really good. We're really good at what we do. We take pride in what we do. The problem is at the end of the year, we have no idea what we've done. We can't go back and show anyone what we've done. And so we have no proof of what we're doing. And in addition to that, the customer, our client, the employee, has no way to look at what we're doing and communicate with us outside of walkie-talkies or emails and so on. And I said, in addition to that, sometimes a lot of what we do is relying on people. And sometimes if people get sick or they go on smoke breaks, this whole process breaks down. So what we're looking to do is build, use a system to help us keep track of what we're doing. And this is the kind of story that I hear all the time with places. I mean, I've seen people doing really cool things with WhatsApp and walkie-talkies and phones and text messaging, and it's really effective, and they have really good teams. And the problem is, without a system like an Archibus or any other kind of CMMS system, it's very difficult to kind of justify how well they're doing. And even in one case, I ran into a service provider who almost got kicked out of a facility, and their contract ended because they were so good that no one ever had to call them for a problem. They were, running preventive maintenance procedures, making sure nothing was breaking down. And at the end of the day, the client said, "Hey, I never see you in the office." And they said, "Well, yeah, because nothing ever breaks down and you don't complain." So to be able to prove how well you're doing, to be able to speak with the customer and interact with the customer, you need to kind of implement a system. And I think that's why a lot of people start looking at an Archibus or another CMMS. But here's where we have an opportunity, most of us, for creating transparency and for creating measurable, actionable items or metrics, and also automating as much as possible so we're not relying on individuals to communicate with each other. Because as soon as you start relying on one individual to send an email or another one to answer the phone or another one to send a text message, that's when things can break down and you don't get that same quality that you're used to providing. So today's session is really about being able to set up a system that will help you communicate with your customers and also communicate with your management. Before we get into that, before you even get into the system, the key piece of communication is bringing clarity and simplicity to your ideas. So if you want to communicate effectively, you need to be clear on what you want first before you start building your system. And that means oftentimes before you get into Archibus, before you look at the steps for setting Archibus up, you've got to really focus yourself on what it is you're trying to do. What's your mission? What current contracts and obligations can you make an inventory of? Do you have contracts with KPIs? Do you have a contract, an unwritten contract with your customer or with your staff who are responding to things? These things have to be identified and inventoried. You have to identify what services you're actually offering to your customers and also to your business, and simplify those services, because you all do about 800 things over the course of a month, but no one can pick and choose these 800 things to review with you. You've got to distill them down to what exactly it is you're providing for people, and then identify actionable metrics for everything that you want to prove. How fast you are, how many tickets are overdue, what's your satisfaction rating on all your work requests. These types of things are important to get out up front, so that when you identify the data that you need in the system and you identify the screens that you're using, you know exactly what it is you need and what kind of a workflow is going to get you that. And that's what you focus on when you build the system. All the additional stuff is bonus if you can do that. And if you can do these things and that comes out in the system clearly, then your customers will be happy and you will be happy. Now, in a typical service environment, we have what I would say is three or four typical teams or steps. The first team is the initiators, right? The people who identify services that are required, whether it's maintenance services or office services or transportation services, gardening, landscaping, all of the things that you all do every day. These initiators are commonly known as the customer or the employee, the service team. Maybe it's an inspector or even a guest who comes on site. In some cases, I've dealt with families and relatives who want to book a pool room or a tennis court or something. So these are all initiators, and these are the people that we have to communicate with. On the other side, on the execution side or the service side, are the acceptors, the supervisors, and the executors. So these are people like approvers, service desk, call centers, building managers who oversee the services and have a responsibility to review, clarify, and even triage the requests that come in from the initiators. Once a request or service is accepted, you have your supervisors, executors, and we can call these whatever you want, but generally speaking, there's this kind of process of communication that happens within your environment. And what we want to do with a system like Archibus is make this as simple and as automated as possible. So today's session, really, it's called effective, it's called make communication easy, but really it's about the Archibus service desk and maintenance applications and how you set up those applications to help you communicate with your clients and your stakeholders. And there's two of them. The service desk application is used for managing service tickets, and the maintenance application is also used for managing service tickets. What's the difference? Well, the service desk was designed more for outsourced services, simple services from our point of view, where you want to review a request, make sure you can get that request approved, and someone will come in, provide the service, and complete the service. So these are things like bookings and office services that you can manage fairly simple. The maintenance application is for services that require, materials, multiple teams getting involved, estimations of work, the ability to put things on hold, to close things out, to survey items. All of these different steps and workflows will be included in the maintenance application. The cool thing is, if you have both applications, you can use them both. So maintenance shows up in the service console for service tickets, and it also shows up in the maintenance console. So that's quite interesting. So this gives you the opportunity to decide, what kinds of groups are going to use which consoles. Do you need a lot of detail? If so, use the maintenance console. If you're just responsible for approvals and closing out tickets, use the service console. And the question is, how do we set this up to work? Well, there's a series of 11 steps we're going to kind of run through very quickly today, and I apologize for that, but the idea is we're going to give you a real brief overview of what these steps are, so you can go back and try them out. But number one, you want to think about adding all employees as users of the system and have all employees be part of your services that you offer for the organization. What that means is you also need to make sure that all employees have certain information associated with them, like a default location and a phone number and so on. You also need to identify the teams who are going to respond to the service request, the types of services that you're going to be offering, and if you need to ask any questions about the services as you receive the request, as well as the execution workflows and execution teams that are part of the service. So we're going to talk about all these individually in a few minutes. But before I do that, I just want to talk about some common scenarios. So the typical scenario in an Archibus situation, or probably any facility anywhere in the world, is what I would call a single KPI scenario, which basically means a request is initiated and at some point it's closed out by a team and it has a single KPI that you're looking at. How fast was it closed out? Is it overdue? Did you do it on time? And that even that simple scenario, as we said, will include those 4 teams that we talked about earlier. And there's about 7 different communication points in that whole process. The first communication point is the initiation, right? We call that a request in Archibus. And that's where the initiator contacts someone who's going to receive and review that request and make sure it's something that they can handle and that they'll accept. So the second step is what I call triage or acceptance. It's where the execution team has a chance to look at it and decide if they're going to go ahead and follow through with it. Archibus calls this the edit and approve step. It's really not approving, it's really accepting in this case. And then there's always the assignment step where someone on the team has to identify who's going to go out and provide the service, the actual person who's going to execute the job. In Archibus, we call assignment issuing. Then once the job's been issued and the vendor or the service provider is working on it, they have to send regular updates. Sometimes that means communicating back to the supervisor. Sometimes it means communicating back to the customer or the initiator. So that's a step that needs to be, or a communication point that needs to be considered. And then of course at the end, you need to make sure that everyone knows when the job was completed, that it has been completed. Someone else typically has to verify that it was completed well and if not, send it back to the executor. And then finally, if you want, you should be taking somewhat kind of regular surveys of the teams to make sure that you're getting some feedback from the customer on the job that you're doing. So in even a simple scenario that we're describing here, a single KPI scenario, there are 7 points of communication. And if you're relying on individuals at each of those 7 points, you're going to be extending the amount of service you have. You're going to be complicating the communication with the customer potentially, and so there are some issues that come up. In a well-run operation, this is not a problem. This all gets done very well and effectively. But it's when things start to go wrong that you can't recover from, that you want to have the system in place to help you manage the work that you do. In addition to this, though, there are more complicated scenarios that require additional teams of people who need to know if things have been done on time, or if the service needs any additional kind of work. So these are what I call the parent-child KPI, and these also can be handled within Archibus. And it's even more important to have a system in these contexts, because if all of this extra work and these extra teams are being left out of the main workflow in terms of communication and history and everything, if it's all being done through telephones or emails, again, there's no identification of what's happened, who's been taking too long, who's holding the process up, and so on. So when I talk about parent and child KPIs, it means that initially a request has been made. We can call that the parent, and then oftentimes that request is going to be affected by child requests, child KPIs. Like for example, if a job has to get estimated by an estimation group, or if it requires design, if it requires procurement, renovation, furnishing, moves, all these things that might affect the actual job. And that's also that's assuming that there's no grandparent, what I would call in this particular scenario. The grandparent are jobs that come from more complex tasks, like inspections or condition assessments, capital projects, or even large-scale events. All of these things generate multiple parent requests, and those people responsible, the project managers, the inspectors, they're going to want to be communicated on each of the processes that are taking place down below it, whether it's the parent process or whether it's all the child processes as well. So all of these can be accommodated with Archibus with the same 11 steps that we're using now. So what you want to end up with in Archibus is some way to track all of the requests that come into the system, and to do it as simply as possible, which means usually we set up something like the workplace application for the requester, which has a 3-level drill down where they can select at the top level a very basic type of service, office or gardening or maintenance. And then from there, drill into 1 or 2 additional levels to get at more detail. So if it's maintenance, for example, you have air conditioning, water, plumbing, electricity, fire protection, conveyance, and so on. And ultimately, to avoid long, lengthy conversations with the service desk, you can fill out checklists for those items. Now, of course, this checklist doesn't represent air conditioning, but you get the idea. Archibus in version 2023 now has the ability to use these questions to gather information about the job without actually asking the requester to identify the problem himself, because we know requesters often are not the engineers or technical staff. They don't have the technical know-how to really describe the issue. So what we try to do first is develop a very simple way to get the information into the system and start tracking it. And ultimately, that service team that receives it can do the same thing. They can either manage that request through the system, close it out if it's a very simple request, or if they need to, they can link to these children requests for estimations and other work that's necessary, and all with one console, review what's happening, not just with the original request, but with all of those linked children. So as a result of implementing a system, even a simple system with a few steps, the initiators get automated email updates. They have the ability to be tagged in comments by the maintenance person, let's say, who's using the mobile device, the on-site application, for example, and their communication can happen back and forth between them and get updated. So if you look at for example, this self-service access on the workplace application, a user can go and look at a request that they've made. They can see the current status, they can see a basic description, and down below they can see the activity and not just the activity, but any comments that they've made, like, well, we're going to be arriving to respond. Now, those comments will generate email notifications that they would have received as well. So they have a lot of access to what's happening with their request to make them a little bit happier with what's going on. And not only them, but the execution team should get something out of using a system as well. Now, I always tell people you want to use Archibus as little as possible because you want to spend your time working, on your job. But if you let the system do what it can do, the execution team gets automated routing to the right groups. They have automated email, so they don't have to send their own emails, even text messages. The system can schedule substitutes, and also it's going to be keeping track of all the history that you create. So every time you push a button, that generates a historical record that lets you know what's happened to that particular work order. So the communication suddenly becomes a lot more transparent, and it becomes a lot more history as to what's been happening, and everyone has access to the same information as opposed to having to communicate via email or text. So this all sounds kind of nice, I hope, but what does it take to get this accomplished in Archibus? Well, it's got these 11 steps. First, you got to update and add employees. Then you have to define teams. You have to define your problems, or what we call, I don't like the word problem in Archibus, but it's really your services that you're offering. Then you need a service catalog for the end user or the requester to clearly and understandably create a request for the right thing. You can develop questionnaires, define priorities and craftspeople, service desk roles, and so on. So I'm going to walk you very quickly through these things now so that you can see where they are and what they take and how involved they are. And then we'll go ahead and finish up the session. So with that said, I'm going to now take a look and log into the latest version of Archibus. It's 2023. And like we said, what we're trying to do is get to a very simple way for a requester to log into the system, select the service, drill into whatever it is they're having an issue with, like electricity, for example, and say, hey, I've got a light bulb that's broken or a broken outlet, and put in a description of the issue. The system knows who they are because it has a default, each person has a default floor, and they can very simply submit the request, and all their information is captured as part of that. So that's as simple as it can be to initiate a request with Archibus, and at the same time, the system starts gathering information. As a result, the execution teams then have consoles where they can manage those tickets. And those consoles will show the tickets. There's my electrical request, and they can manage the tickets throughout the whole process that you've selected or that you choose. So from the request to the issuing to the from the acceptance to the issuing to the completion phase, and even down to the survey phase. So all the life cycle of your request can be managed here. Now, how do we get to this point? Well, step one is make sure your employees are set up as users. So an administrator will go into the system under the user and security application. They'll identify users, make sure that every user is in the system with a role for the request process, and that they have an email address associated with them so that emails can be sent automatically to them. And then lastly, if they're going to be using the workplace application in versions 2022 and beyond, you can set up your users to use workplace so that when they log into Archibus, they log right into the screen, and then they have access to all their service requests and everything else by default. So then they can go in and look at the details and so on. So that's number one. Number two, make sure all these people are set up, make sure all of their employee accounts are set up with also some basic background information. So under the space and occupancy application or other areas, you can go into the employee's details and identify a default building and floor, and then of course the email address that the employee will need to get emails sent to them. The reason for that, you might say, hey, we all work remotely now and so on, but the reason for the default building floor is to avoid more steps in the request process. So when I made a request, the system already knew what building and floor I was on. I didn't have to go and do 2 extra clicks to choose a building and choose a floor. And it just makes things that much simpler. So that's another thing that's the second step you want to make sure is done, is making sure every employee has a building and a phone number and an email address, basically. Third step, like I said, is make sure that we identify those teams who are responding to your services. Now I'm doing this now in this order because when you set up your problem types later on, your problem types really are just ways for you to route to the appropriate group. So where you want to start with problem types is by identifying the groups that are responding. So in Archibus, we call those groups work teams. And work teams, as you can see, is just a record with a description. And there's something that says you can assign themselves, craftspeople can assign themselves yes or no. But all you do is you set up each a team for every single group that's going to respond to a step in the process. And it doesn't mean that, you know, organizational, you map organizational teams here. These are the actual teams that you want to be available to the workflow. So you might have a team, even though you have a plumbing team, you might break that plumbing team into multiple work teams, one for the call center, one for the materials team, one for the actual plumbers, and so on. So defining the work teams is going to be important because that's really what your services are going to be based on. And once you do that, you get into your services. So under the corrective maintenance application or in the workplace service application, there's a role called the service desk manager who can create a service catalog. This catalog is what defines what you see here. So this is a 3-level drill down into a particular problem type, and it's drilled down in through here. So we're going to go in, for example, look at the maintenance drill. Let's see, I think it was general maintenance. And as you can see, the service catalog allows you 3 different options, 3 different levels: maintenance, electrical in this case, and then you have your light bulb, outlet, and hazard, and so on. And so what you do is you identify basically the title for the menu, general maintenance. You identify an image, and you say it's active for self-service, and you identify where you want it on the page. So here's general maintenance. Here's the items under maintenance. Then you identify under electrical, again, the same thing, the image, the name, and so on. And lastly, you identify the actual service that you're offering, which is replacing the light bulb. That service is going to be active. It's going to, you can choose to send this group to an external link, to choose to show or hide the location, to show or hide documents. And if you want the service to be connected to your maintenance application, you can choose a particular problem type to generate when it generates the ticket. So this is important as well, which means you also need problem types. So of course, when we get into the background data for maintenance, you'll have an option to set up your problem types, which basically are services. And when I work with a client, I try to set up and map the catalog items to problem types. So again, as you can see here, you might have an electrical problem type, and that's going to map to your light bulb and outlet and power and so on. And that way, when a user makes a request, the execution team receives the same type of problem that the user has requested, and it flows very nicely. For every service and problem, you can also set up questionnaires, like I said. So you can basically help yourselves triage what the problem is by asking the customer the same sets of questions that you would ask every single time they call you on the phone. So again, you go to the service desk manager, there's a request type screen where you can go in and you can select your, let's say it's a copy service, for example, in this case, and it has a questionnaire assigned to it. You check off that button, you press save, and you can start developing the questions that you want to ask the customer. So for a copy service, you might ask, well, is this a color copy? Yes or no. So you'll make an enumerated list of options for the customer. If you want to know how many copies, you can ask a question, how many copies do you need? And again, it's a free form, so the user can type in whatever they want there. So you define those questionnaires, and that's going to help you triage the issues that the customers are requesting. After that, you're going to start thinking about workflow. So when someone requests a service and it's going to be sent to the team, what should that workflow look like? And one of the things you want to do prior to defining the workflow is identify the individuals who are parts of the team, and also the types of priorities that you have. So each service that you have often will come with different priorities, and there's a way to assign them here using the define SLA priorities option. So as you can see here, we have something called an urgent priority. It's a priority number 2. And basically that allows me to define different workflows for different priorities. Now I usually go into whole conversations about how we shouldn't have emergencies in Archibus, because typically emergencies, are covered on the phone, because if you're sitting down to a computer to type in a request, it's probably not an emergency. But again, you can identify these as labels for whatever you want. It doesn't have to be urgent, high priority, low priority. It can be, leaky faucet, overflowing bathroom, roof leaky roof tile, whatever. So it can be a little bit more descriptive of actually what the work's going to be. So you want to set up your priorities next, and then identify the individuals that are going to be responding to these jobs. So that's, if we go back down to maintenance, we have a place to define the craftspeople. And basically what we're doing here is we're saying, I know we have employees in the system, and I know we have users, but there's also a group of people who are going to be part of a workflow, who are going to be part of a team, and this is where you set them up. So you set them up, again, with a code. You use the same email you used everywhere else. You assign them to at least one, possibly multiple teams if necessary, and then you identify them and their capabilities. Are they going to be a supervisor? Are they going to do estimations? Are they going to assign work? Can they have work assigned to them, and so on? And you save that. And there's lots of other things you can do with craftspeople, like about schedules and shifting and so on. But basically, that's what you need, is the record for the individual who's going to be on the team, who's going to receive the request and respond to it. And then once you've got that, you may, and I often do this now, you may want to go into the corrective maintenance application and use this system integrator function to develop something called a service desk role. I use these all the time, because what service desk roles are is, it's not just a team, it's basically a chance for you to query based on a condition who's going to receive a particular step, who's going to be assigned to a step. Now, out of the box, Archibus comes with a building manager, a craftsperson, a requester, and a supervisor service desk role, which means you can assign steps to supervisors and so on. But the cool thing is here, you can create your own roles and develop them however you want. So if I wanted to have something called a plumbing team set up in Archibus, I can say, okay, we have a plumbing team. The default employee is the system. I don't like using employee names in any particular spots. And then we can choose approvals, confirmations, notifications. So that makes these guys available for each of these types of steps when you set up the workflow. And then down below, you can choose to kind of create a lookup based on the employee in the work request record, or you can develop your own custom SQL clause, which is based on whatever condition that you want. I find a really simple way to do this is just to identify the work team, right? So you create a condition for each work team, let's say the plumber's team, and you identify that so that a step can be assigned to a team. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute when we go in and assign steps. But having all of these conditional roles also helps when you have to set up a more complicated set of processes. So having done all of this, you're now ready to develop workflows in Archibus. And this is a whole 3-hour session on its own, so I'm going to very quickly run through it. But under both the preventive maintenance and corrective maintenance applications, and also under the workplace services application, there is the ability to add these workflows. And when you do that, this is how you identify how the system is going to automate the request process. And it's a 3-step tool, basically, where the first step says, where is the request coming from? What kind of problem is it asking about? What priority is it? So that's where your priority comes in. And who is it coming from? And based on that, we can set up a distinct workflow. And every single priority, you can have multiple priorities here, each with its own workflow. In this next step, you set up the actual workflow. Is this a basic request and complete operation? Or is it going to require approval? Does it require an email notification to the customer or to a supervisor, to the building manager? Does it require an acceptance step? Who's going to be responsible for the overall request, right? Who's the execution team? And as you go and you add these types of steps, for example, add, edit, and approve, this is where those service desk roles come in. You can select, I want my requester to do this, or I want my building manager to do that. That way you don't have to select a specific craftsperson or employee. You select a condition, and the system will find the correct craftsperson employee for that particular step. And then later on, as you can see, there's a lot of different things: approvals, estimations, schedules. You can add inspection checklists, surveys, verification steps, and so on. And all of these individual items can be assigned at different statuses to a specific person or group of people that you want to be responsible for that. And by doing this, you are going to be generating basically historical records of every single thing that's happened with this request. And all of the emails will have corresponding history associated with it, all available as part of that individual service request. Lastly, you set up your service windows. When can you do the job? How much time do you need to respond? How many hours or days do you need to complete a job? When do you work? Do you work on holidays? Is this tied to a contract that you have in place with its own KPIs and so on and so forth? So you do all of that and you set up, it could be 100, it could be 200 different individual workflows that correctly route every type of problem that you've set up back to the appropriate team. So if you've got 5 teams and you've got, you should probably have something like 5 problems, and then you'll only have a need for 5 workflows. And by doing something like that, keeping it simple, you end up, the management of the system also becomes very simple. Now I'm running a little bit over here, so I'm going to get back to the last step here. After the service level agreements, of course, people often forget to spend time on one of the most important parts of the system, which is the email notification that gets sent out to everybody who uses it, the customer, the supervisor, and so on. So lastly, there is I think under maintenance, you can get there from, I think it's system integrator, where you have managed notifications, or if you are an administrator, you can help your teams manage their messages. But basically, take some time in the 12th step, and don't forget this part, to go in and identify how you want to communicate with the user. So for example, I like to use something like this, basic HTML, to set up a message to create a nice looking email text or title. And what I mean by that is, if we go back to this presentation, I had an example here. My emails look like this guy here. Okay, and which is very simple to create with Archibus, but it's just it's using a little bit of bolding, it's using different colors, it's organizing the data, and it's allowing you to type in whatever you want and control what's on the screen. For me, this is a really easy thing to do, and it's very important for the end user and the customer, and good communication. So step 12 is take some time to do that. Now, for those of you who are probably thought this was a really quick and a walkthrough of all these different scenarios, I have added in the presentation a slide for each step with the location of the item that we talked about. So you can go back later on and find these on your own if you want to. I haven't added mobile applications in here, but of course, if I was going to do a 12-step on this list, I would set up the setup for mobile applications is a really easy, or I'm not going to say easy. It's going to depend on your IT group and your hardware and everything else. But step 12 is get their teams access to mobile devices and able to communicate via the mobile devices. Lastly, I'm going to go back to the slides here. Whoops, skip to. Lastly is evaluate what you've done, right? You get up the system up and running, you have people using it, you need to be able to evaluate it. So make sure that you spend some time on reporting and KPIs. And this is an example of a customer we did recently where after we had implemented their solution, we built them a dashboard where they could look at and they could filter by dates, by work types, by locations, by the service team, by contracts even, and they could filter on that data however they wanted. And at the top of the screen was the most important metrics they used: total number of requests managed during that time frame, average turnaround time, average time on hold, satisfaction rating, average time overdue in days. So those are the things that we're focusing on. And then we looked at, okay, where are we in terms of status? What about escalations? How many requests are late? What about overall satisfaction? How happy are our customers with the work that we're doing? And then what are the top 5 service problems, and how many requests are being closed out once a month, and so on. So basically this is an aging. And as you can see, we actually generated multiple pages of these dashboards with a link to all the detail. So this kind of a thing ultimately gives you the ability to communicate not just with your management and let your management know how things are going at the end of every day or every year, but also allows you to evaluate how you're doing and make changes to and tweaks to all the processes so that your communication and your service gets better and better. So we're out of time for now. Just to summarize here, ultimately, when you start using Archibus, don't think about the detail. Don't overcomplicate things. Focus on making the communication between you and the customer and you and your management easy. And you do that first by clarifying the mission, your obligations, and all of your goals up front before you get into the system. and then focus on simplifying and automating the interface for each individual user group, which means allowing initiators access to the workplace, allowing supervisors access to the consoles, allowing execution teams access to mobile devices, and so on. And then evaluate, evaluate, and evaluate. The results are going to be that you get out of your system transparency, metrics, automation, and most importantly, the benefits of customer and staff satisfaction, and ultimately, hopefully, not just an effective, but also a justifiable performance of across your teams. So everybody, thank you very much. Just a gentle reminder, this is the first of about 10 in the series. In the next series, we're going to focus on the asset management application in particular. And we're going to, again, talk a little bit more about how to simplify these services we're talking about. Later on, we'll get into FIM and BIM. And I think, Ian, we have about 15 minutes now for questions. So in case any of you decide to leave, we just want to give you all a thank you for attending. And if you need any more information about the series, please contact Ian, who's the host of these series. And if you want to request training or other services, please feel free to contact Kelly Welch. And with that, Ian, I'll turn it over to you and we can answer some questions.
Yes, we can. I'm going to hop back on the webcam here. We have one question so far submitted. If anybody else is sitting on any questions, there's actually a questions tab here. It'll pop up there and I can answer it. This first one we have is from Julie Pereira. Are the dashboards only available in the latest version of Archibus, and can we build them with version 2023.02?
Okay, so I'm gonna just share my screen again. So with dashboards, to me, is a specific thing, but I think it needs to be clarified. What you see on the screen right now is what we call a home page. With all of these little colors, they are using something called performance metrics. Home pages and performance metrics have been around since, I don't know, I think it was version 21. So if you're on 21 or later, you can access home pages with performance metrics and get exactly what you're seeing on this screen out of it. Secondly, I make a differentiation between home pages and dashboards because home pages are based on data that was run on a nightly basis. So this will be up to date as of last night. Dashboards run off of live data. So a dashboard, for example, there are dashboards in Archibus out of the box, like the ones that you'll find under the management reports. There's one here called labor analysis I happen to like. Which basically allows you to drill into your portfolio and look at a particular, I'm gonna have to find a year that has data. But for example, if I look at 2017, I think I've got some data there. And this will give you things, again, agings on work requests, archived requests, the amount of craftsperson hours spent on jobs, work team performance with a breakdown of all the current and open jobs. So this is a dashboard that comes out of the box with Archibus. And there's a few of those. On top of that, you can create, you can have Horizant create a dashboard as well. So the example that I showed you was a custom dashboard created for a client, which I think is a pretty good one, but it's not out of the box.
Okay, thank you, Sean. I don't believe we have any other ones. We're not sitting on any other ones, which is good because we're right on time to end it at 1:15. Thank you, Sean, for the first great training. Like Sean said, this is the first in a 10-part series. So we're going to be sending out a thank you email after this for everyone for attending, as well as information on the next session. Oh, hold on, we might be sitting on another one. Hold on, we actually are sitting on the question. Would the dashboard allow a drill down to finer details? Example, work request details.
For me, this is the fun. I'm going to show you this dashboard if you don't mind. I got to have a say in how this was designed. So actually, I designed it. So this is a little bit fun here.
You've opened a can of worms here, Sean.
What's that? I'm going to just show you this dashboard. So this is the dashboard. I'm going to just go back to, it's not a live environment, so I'm going to go back to a year ago. As you can see, I fill out the filter and it automatically adjusts the dashboards on the screen. There's the actual request, turnaround time, ratings, and then we have, as I said, we actually have multiple dashboards in tabs. So I don't like to scroll down a page. So I said, look, if we want this particular customer wanted about 15 different charts and graphs. So I said, let's break them into 3 tabs. We'll have the most important on the first page, the next group based on labor statistics on the second page, and then the types of work on the last page. So request by organization, estimated versus actual hours, and so on. And on the last page, based on the filter, again, is the detail. So this is all that is your work request code, and we didn't get to group these yet because this is still actually a rough draft. But you can group these by, for example, site, building, service type. We added parent requests so that you can have the parent and child relationships in there to see who's late and who's not late on a particular job. And as you can see, this is grouped into kind of basic information, priority status. Then it's grouped into service team, so who's responsible for managing the request. Then we have it grouped into, for example, the associated business line that the request is request came from. So for the department name, who the requester was, what lease was associated with it, and then of course location information, site, building, rental unit, date, and then date to perform. All of the key dates, metrics that you can work off of are here, as well as even we have integrations with SAP and so on. So there's a whole lot of information that's captured on this. So I hope that's enough detail for you. I've never seen a report with that much detail on a dashboard, but yeah, we did that. And of course, the most important thing is we can choose the fields that we want to use, right? So we can list all those fields together, or we can pull out the ones that we want, and then we just export to Excel for those people who love to play with Excel. So for me, this is a nice, I hope was a nice dashboard, but it was, again, only, this was a draft, what you're looking at here on the screen.
Perfect, thank you. We have one last question. Is there a section that will talk more about the mobile app and future training series? Absolutely, there will be. Where, like I said, this is a 10-part series. We're gonna get more into work orders, asset management, the actual and hands-on stuff as well. There will be a section, the mobile app, and I will make sure to outline it in the invite for that training series session as well and highlight it. Not sitting on any other questions. It's 1:16. It was scheduled to end at 1:15. Thank you everybody for attending. Keep an eye out on your emails for information about the next session, and we'll see you at the next one. If you have any further questions, like Sean said, reach out to Kelly Welch for more information or myself, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you.